Hello, history friends. These are the 30.1 notes. You're just going to listen to them today as we go through our last couple sections of notes. So in 1980, we're going to get a new president. His name is Ronald Reagan. People were really unhappy with the way President Carter had handled the Iran hostage situation, so when it was time for a new election, they're going to choose Ronald Reagan. And on the day that he took over, those 52 hostages that had been held in Iran are going to be released. And this was really because Iran was they were mad at Carter because he let the Shah come to America. And so they said, we're not going to let them go while Carter's in office, but when Reagan takes over, we'll release the hostages. At that point in time, he was the oldest person to become president. He was 69 years old. We know now that we've had several presidents who are older than that. But prior to becoming president, he was in the movies. He was a movie star, and he had also been the governor of California. His goals as president were to return confidence to the American people. He wanted to decrease inflation. He wanted to lower taxes and also decrease the power of the federal government. President Reagan was a Republican. President Reagan's going to give a speech on March 30th of 1981, so he hadn't been in office for very long. And he's there speaking about violent crimes, and he says that violent crimes have actually gone up by 10%. And he and two of his aides are going to be shot by someone named John Hinckley Jr. as they were walking to the car. President Reagan will be rushed to the hospital, and he's going to make a recovery, and he's back to work within a month. The American people are pretty happy with his courage and his confidence and his good humor, and that he was able to survive this assassination attempt and also get back to work so quickly. President Reagan had a lot of plans for decreasing the involvement of the federal government in Americans' day-to-day lives. So President Reagan thought, let me fix my typo there. President Reagan thought that people were too dependent on the government, especially following the Great Depression. The American government had stepped in and provided so many social programs during that Great Depression time, and a lot of those programs were still in place. But that's what made him feel like Americans were too dependent on the government. Instead of trying to work to better themselves, they kept looking to the government for extra help. So he wants to cut the budget by $33 billion, and the majority of those spending cuts are going to be in social programs. And this plan is going to like I said, cut the social programs, but also then limit the power and the size of the federal government. That's something that a lot of Republicans like to do. So you may have heard that even more recently with our most recent election, that Republican presidents want to try and cut the spending, and they want to try and cut the involvement of the government in our day-to-day lives. So his economic plan is going to be called Reaganomics. Of course, they name it after him, and it's the Economic Recovery Tax Act of 1981. He is quoted as saying he wants to fix the worst economic mess since the Great Depression. His goal is to try and cut taxes and see how that would trickle down and influence the American people. So he wants to stop taxing big companies. He hopes that if he stops taxing those big companies, they're going to have more money to grow, which would mean more jobs. So if they're paying less in taxes, the big business owners will have more money. Maybe they could open up a new plant, which would then equal more jobs. And if they're spending less on those taxes, then they can hire more people. The federal government, he felt, was collecting too much money in taxes. And so the main purpose here is to stimulate private investment. He wants the workers to be making more money. He wants the businesses to have more money. Because if people have more money, they can spend more money in the economy. So he wants to stimulate our economy that way. And he also is going to appoint people to the EPA who are not sympathetic to the environment, but instead want to support business interests, not the environment at all. So the outcome of Reaganomics is to cut personal income tax by 25%. That's a huge percentage that he's going to be able to cut that tax rate. And that's for personal income tax. That's like your paycheck, my paycheck. So people are going to be bringing home 25% more. So for an example, if you made $100 in your paycheck before, now you're going to make $125. And that's a huge change for most Americans. He's also going to lower the business tax. So business owners are not paying as much in taxes. But remember, the American government gets their money, because really the government's like a business, and they get their money through taxes. And so with people and businesses paying less in taxes, that means the federal government is making less money. And so he's going to have to make cuts somewhere. And those big cuts are going to be in the areas of education and in the environment. He's also going to be spending less on urban, social, cultural, and health problems. So maybe things like food stamps and EBT cards, educational programs before and after school, childcare, free and reduced lunch, those types of things are going to be cut by President Reagan. Because part of his argument, too, is that if people are making more in their paychecks, they should be able to pay for those things themselves. The one area where he's going to increase spending the most, though, is defense and military. And he's criticized a little bit by doing so, because we technically weren't in a war at this point. The Cold War was really winding down. We were in the last years of the Cold War. So thinking, why are we spending so much on military? That's a pretty traditional Republican thing, historically, is that they would rather make cuts and have people pay for things themselves, but also make sure that the government is the military is still being funded. Now, these are just some characteristics of different political parties, not saying they're right or wrong, but Reagan was a Republican, and that's really what guided some of his cuts in his spending. So there's a picture of him as Time Man of the Year. And then let's move to some new topics. President Reagan is going to appoint someone named Sandra Day O'Connor to the Supreme Court. And this is a huge deal because she's the first woman to serve in that role. She was a conservative, which is a Republican, which means she interprets the Constitution very literally. And she, like President Reagan, wants America to be more conservative, wants America to stop spending so much on social programs and allow people to pay for those things themselves. People were pretty fond of Reagan, but they weren't always sure of his work ethic. So he kind of came in different from other presidents who said, I'll work all day long, day and night, no matter what it takes to get all the things done as president. But he's only going to work 8 hours a day, and he gives his responsibility a lot to his cabinet and staff. In 1984, he's going to win by a huge margin, though. People were really happy with the tax cuts, and they liked his plans. But it's historical to note that in that election, he also beats the first woman who was running for vice president, which we have had a woman in that role. Kamala Harris was our vice president just before. But Geraldine Ferraro was the first woman to ever run for vice president, and that was in 1984. All right. After the president was reelected, our space program was continuing to grow, but we're going to see a very terrible event happen, and it is the explosion of the Challenger. And this happens on January 28th, 1986. The Challenger exploded into flames 73 seconds, so just about a minute and 13 seconds after it had taken off, and all 7 members on board died. One of those members was a science teacher who had won a contest to get to go up in space, and she was going to teach a lesson from space. Christine McAuliffe was her name. This is the worst disaster in 25 years of spaceflight, and it's going to set the United States back 2 years because we can't continue to send people up if it's not safe. So real quick, we can watch a video of that happening.
Yeah.
All right, so you can see in that video that the space shuttle had just exploded, and this is so tragic because most of America was watching. When the space shuttles used to take off, they would be broadcast on television. People would be all watching at home, and so most of America, remember we said like over 90% of people had televisions now, were watching this, and it was recorded and it was live, and no one knew what happened at that moment. But sadly, they will find out very quickly that no one survived, and this was really a sad day in our history. All right, friends, we are going to stop the notes here, and then you're going to complete a reading about Ronald Reagan, and then there'll be a new recording for the second set of notes.